Welcome to a Fifth of Jack Gaming, where it's Wednesday. You know what that means? It's the time for the deep dive of Optimus Prime, or aka Autobots Roll Out. Now let's jump over to the folks of Moxfield to be able to show you what the breakdown that we have with the deck. We're not going to go into a deck tech because that's in the previous video. We'll have a link down below to the deck tech of the video. And here we are. We're over at Moxfield. So obviously this is built around Optimus Prime, Hero. And the big thing is that when he dies, he ends up flip-flopping into a vehicle, which makes it a little bit more harder to kill it. So you have to kill Optimus twice. Also, when he's on this side, he becomes a vehicle which doesn't have a crew or anything like that. So he's not a creature when it's not your turn. The big thing that Optimus likes to end up doing is called bolster. That's when you take the lowest toughness of a creature that you have and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So with that, we're going to go pretty much all in as much as we can with the +1/+1 counters. The Veil the Champion lets us end up putting an additional +1/+1 counter. Steel Overseer puts +1/+1 counters across the board on artifact creatures that we control, and we have a whole lot of those in this thing. And then the Ozolith allows us to make sure that we keep those +1 counters. Like if we end up having a creature getting killed or anything and the Ozolith's out there, those counters will go onto the Ozolith itself. And then whenever we go into a combat, we can end up taking the counters off of the Ozolith and putting it on the creature instead. Then obviously Optimus Prime is kind of like a Voltron build. So we ended up having a whole bunch of artifacts, equipments that we ended up trying to equip him up with. So we have a couple different options that we can end up doing. We could go the typical Optimus, or the typical Voltron build is where we make our commander into the big battering ram. Or we could take another creature and end up making him into the battering ram. And then we have some good removal, that's solid quality with it. And then it can't be Autobots Roll Out without having other Transformers, aka Autobots. So this is where we have RC, Goldbug, Jetfire, Prowl, and Ratchet. They all have their own little abilities, and they all have more that meets the eye cost. Most of the time, we're going to end up casting them on the face side, not on the alternate side. I think, honestly, the best one that we're going to end up being able to flip back over would be Jetfire or Prowl on that other sides. For tutors, we ended up having Fabricate and Open the Armory. Allows us to look for either an artifact or, like in the case of Open the Armory, an equipment that ends up helping out with it. Every deck needs to have its fixing, and we have ours too. We have Arcane Signet, Ashnod's Altar, Azorius Signet, Evolving Wilds, Izzet Signet, Mox Opal, Soul Ring, and Terramorphic Expanse. Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds are lands that we can end up finding out a basic land to be able to help us out to be fixed to the colors that we end up needing. With Optimus Prime being a 3-color, this is a crucial point that you're going to have. Because if you don't have the color spells, you won't be able to play it. A big thing that's also in this is cost reduction. Cloud Key, Enthusiastic Mechanic, Ethereum Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, Jorah's Familiar, and Sunbalance Anvil all makes our stuff cheaper. The cheaper it is, the more that we play, and the faster we can end up being. And then every deck needs to have some kind of form of card draw. We have our card draws in the form of creatures. With Jorah, Weatherlight Captain, whenever you cast a historic spell, you draw a card. So historic spells are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. We have a lot of those in these decks, so it's kind of a little bit craziness. Leshel, the Clockwork Scholar, allows us to draw a card whenever we play an artifact. This only triggers once per turn, though. So, whenever you play like 5 artifacts, you only get to draw 1 card. It also has a nice advantage of prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. So that's the big thing you gotta also realize, is that it's attacking creatures. It's not just preventing combat damage, period. Pure Steel Paladin allows us to draw a card whenever we end up playing an artifact. Or not an artifact, but an equipment. But then we also have this nice little hidden thing of Metalcraft. When you control 3 or more artifacts, you end up having Metalcraft. When we have Metalcraft with Fear Steel, it makes our equip cost 0. Shimmer Dragon allows us to draw a card for whenever we tap 2 untapped artifacts that we control. So here's the big thing about that. We could end up tapping the equipments that we have on the creature. So let's say we have Optimus Prime having the Trailblazer boots, the Sword of an Animist, and we want to draw a card. We could tap those. Those are still equipped because they're equipped to them. But we also get to end up drawing a card. So it's a nice little hidden value that we get within the deck itself. Next is the modular aspects. The +1/+1 counters that we ended up going with is a great thing that goes with modular, because whenever that creature dies, you get to put whatever counters that's on them onto another creature. So like Arcbound Javeneer, Arcbound Mouser, Arcbound Prototype, Arcbound Ravager is the best creature, I would say, for this deck. We'll come back to it and we'll end up breaking down why it's the best. Arcbound Sarakai, Tracker, Arcbound Worker, and then Zabaz, the Glimmer Wasp. It has where we can pay a red to destroy a target artifact, so we can end up killing modular to be able to put those counters on that creature, or it gains flying if we pay a white. Going back over why we think the Ravager is the best is because you can sacrifice it, or sacrifice an artifact and put a +1/+1 counter onto Arcbound Ravager. It has modular 1, so it comes in with 1+ or +1/+1 counter already. But whenever you sacrifice an artifact, you get to put another +1/+1. So what we can end up doing, if it's late in the game and we need to finish them off a little bit, we can end up stacking our board, which most likely has a whole bunch of artifacts, and be able to go an all-in attack with anything that we have equipped. Coolness that we have However, the Battle of the Gods. We're normally just playing it on this side because the hit equipped creature gets double strike. So that's going to be nice. Emerald Lock gives us a way that we can recur our artifacts, where we can end up choosing it and pay the mana cost for it and bring it back on the battlefield. Bruno Battlehammer allows that creature that's Voltroned up with an equipment attached to it get a +2/+0 for each equipment that's attached. And then we also have an option for a first equipped spell being costing 0. Astro, Bearer of the Blades, is nice because we get to look at the top, filter out for any kind of equipment or vehicle, and then equip cost becomes 1. And crew cost becomes 1, but that's a little minuscule. Arkham Draxum is nice because we end up having a target artifact creature's controller sacrifices it. That player may search his or her library for a non-creature card and put it into play, and then shuffle his or her library. So this is a double-edged sword. That we could take one of our artifact creatures, sacrifice it, and bring in one of the bigger artifacts. Or we can end up targeting something that doesn't normally end up getting that. So, like, the biggest artifact I could think of is Blightsteel Colossus, where it has Indestructible. We can tap it, select Blightsteel, and they'll end up having to sacrifice it and then bring something back out from their library, which you don't know. It could be bust, or it could be a bust, or it could be something amazing for them. It's one of those 50-50 things, but at least you're not dying by it, in fact. You have Brilliant Restoration, where we get to bring all of our artifacts back into play. It's a little expensive on the white side, but hey. Board Wipe with Damning Verdict, Organic Extinction. And then you also have Direct Thing with Dispatch. When we have Metalcraft, or normally it would tap a creature, but when we have Metalcraft, we get to exile the creature. Path to Exile. Swords of Plowshare. And the big splashy thing that we have for working with Arkham is Portal to Phyrexia. Costs 9 for when then each player sacrifices 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a target creature card from a graveyard. That's right, a graveyard, onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian and additional to its other types. So if we have a big fatty that's in the graveyard, let's say they end up having a creature that we want to bring back, and then we can end up playing that, and we can end up playing it from their graveyard and having it on our side instead of their side. And then this is just the standard lands that we end up having. Another possible is other cards that we were thinking about putting into the decks. And I have a list of 10 cards right here, which is what the sideboard is showing. Is 10 cards I was thinking about adding in or working ourselves in. So, like you see, Herald of the Streams is like the way to be able to get through damage because it makes anything with a +1/+1 counter on them, or it can't be blocked. It's a pretty amazing that's going to be going on, and we're going to be throwing +1/+1 counters around, so it kind of works out pretty nicely. Perdim, Consular of the Invitation, gives your artifacts hexproof. And if you don't know what that does, that means that your creature or your artifacts can't be targeted as spells or abilities that your opponents control. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have an artifact with the highest value or tied for the highest value, you get to draw a card. Nice little hidden value to be able to get in the deck. Shoyun, the Silent Tempest, will be able to give you double strike whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Reaver Cleaver is amazing because it gets a +1/+1 trample, and then whenever this creature does combat damage, create that many treasure tokens. So it's another way that we can end up ramping it up. Something similar is a Godsend, where creature gets +3/+3, and whenever it becomes blocked, or whenever it blocks or becomes blocked by one or more creatures, you may exile one of those creatures. Opponents can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card. So with Commander, normally you have only one copy, but you might end up getting splash damage. But this is a way to be able to protect any of our creatures that we have Voltroned up. Talking about being Voltron up, all that glimmers is something. I know it's an enchantment, but it's a nice little added spell gives a cost of a 1 and a white, but you get a +1/+1 for each other artifact or an enchantment that you control. We're going to control a lot of artifacts. This is pretty much an artifact deck, so it's going to have a nice big old bump with it. Abu gives your stuff haste, and it has a nice little addition is whenever one or more creatures you control attack, Abu deals damage X to any target, and you scry X, where X is the number of tapped artifacts that you control. And then Aether Reservoir is a nice little spell that has it where we gain a life for each time we play an artifact spell. But I also like to call this like the Ion Cannon, because Optimus Prime is notorious for having an Ion Cannon, which is his big gun that he ends up shooting off. But this is a one-time shoot with it because you pay 50 life and you deal 50 damage to any target. So you can hit a player, a creature, or anything like that. This is normally used to knock out other players. Thundering Raju has a haste, and then it does direct damage where X is the number of modified creatures that you control. It's another little finisher that could be pretty nice. And finally, but not least, is Slicer. The main reason why I don't have Slicer in here is because he's not Autobot. He's a mercenary, so he goes in between the two different fractions. But he's really nice because he has double strike and haste. So it's a nice little creature to be able to carry any kind of equipment or anything like that. And that's the main reason I was thinking about adding this guy in there. And granted, he jumps around, but it's pretty nice because the equipment that you have it with, it still belongs to you, but you could let it stay on him, and they'll keep on having a little buff that's going over there. So slowly the opponents is helping out and destroying their own selves. Just for curiosity, the other side has first strike haste, and then whenever it deals combat damage, convert it at the end of combat. Have you built any of these Transformer decks? Let us know down in the comments down below. If there's something you think that we should add to our deck, let us know as well. This has been a heck of a time to be able to have some fun with this deck, and hopefully it'll be something that you enjoy as well. Thank you for watching, and until next time, roll out.